Assalamualaikum everyone. I am Manahil Remote Job Wali. Today we have a very distinguished guest. Her name is Moriah Williams. And Moriah Williams are a renowned figure in the field of intuitive healing and holistic well-being. Today we have the privilege of delving into her life journey, her experiences, and her profound knowledge in the realm of practical magic, distance healing, and animal communication, and many other fascinating aspects. So, without further ado, let's extend our warm welcome to Moria and embark on this enlightening conversation. So, Ma'am Moria, thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much. So, first of all, please introduce yourself for my viewers.
Hi, my name is Moriah Williams. I live in the southwestern United States, and I'm a holistic practitioner and writer and portal witch.
All right, thank you so much for your introduction. So, now let's move on to questions. My first question is on your screen. Can you explain what drew you to the field of intuitive healing, and how did you first become interested in practice like practical magic and distant healing?
So there were a few things. I always sort of had a very strong relationship as a child with, just being aware of animals and other people and sort of other energies around me. And I didn't have much understanding of it. And like sometimes I was kind of scared of it. And I had a teacher who sort of taught me just some very simple ways to like be in relationship. Like I think a lot of relationships in the spirit world work very much like, having good relationships with other people and, with our bodies and stuff. And I also was really sick with Lyme disease, and it was undiagnosed for about 10 years. So like I sort of had to figure out how to tune into my own body and take care of myself as best I could. And that was another thing that sort of led me into healing. And another piece was, just being aware of how much violence is in the world, and really having the sense that like the more we're sort of aligned with ourselves and like aligned with like the greater web, like the more like tendencies for aggression and stuff tend to disappear. Like aligned with like the greater.
All right, great. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your answer. So now let's move on to next questions. My next question is, as a content creator at sorry, this is not
Oh, that's fine.
sorry. So, could you elaborate on the concept of working with your own home guides in the context of intuitive healing, and how do you establish a connection of these guides,
So
and
I think,
how they assist in the healing process?
yeah, so I think it really depends from person to person. I think that's the process is really individualized, and I think one of the things is just being able to tune into, like, I start with people often like, do you know how to tune into your own body and your emotions, and your sort of your sense of your preferences and stuff. Like I think it can be, some people sort of come in with like very clear senses of like, oh, like I have this ongoing relationship with my grandmother who passed, or like, I sort of know what my animal is thinking or something. And, for other people, like they may have like spiritual trauma, or they may just, a lot of people have just been told that like we don't have the capacity to listen. And I think we all have the capacity to listen. And, so for some people, we might start with like, do you feel safe in your body? Do you know how to assert yourself? Do you know how to, sort of do you know how to ask questions, or like are there particular things as we go into the field that like you have hesitation about, and like what are those hesitations and taking that seriously? And I really try to demystify the process, and then like all kinds of things can open up. It's really exciting.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for your answer. So, in your work, you mentioned living a better world. And can you explain how intuitive healing practices contribute to creating a better world and what role individuals can play in the process?
Yeah, so I think that we all have a tremendous amount of power. And I think a lot of us are disconnected from that. And that can happen for any number of reasons. We can have different traumas where we end up pulling back, and you know hi, do you want to be in the interview? um you know there's ways that we all experience, whether it's structural pressures or environmental hazards. um there's just a lot of ways that we can feel helpless in the world. And I think there's a lot of ways that we experience power negatively, whether that's like authoritarianism or oppression, or we're just told that somebody else knows and we don't know. And I think like the more we sort of befriend our power, and the more we connect with like nature and the other levels of worlds, the more like I feel like all of the great beings want us to be healthy and happy, and they want us to be part of a functional ecosystem. And the more we're sort of aware of and open to those presences, like the more we can sort of bring that energy into our lives, and support having healthy communities and connections.
All right, great. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your answer. So many people may not be familiar with clinical sacral therapy, autobionomy, and emotional freedom techniques. Can you briefly describe what these therapies involve and how they contribute to the healing process?
Yeah, so all of these have like very specific techniques, and they also have principles. So orthobionomy and cranial sacral are both based in osteopathy, which are both based in Shawnee and Cherokee healing techniques of working with the body and working with the energy. And basically, they're both about like, can you be in alignment with yourself? Can you be in alignment with the greater world? Can you be in touch with your self-healing reflexes? A lot of times, like, we can approach healing as like, oh, we're going to do this thing to the body and fix it. And like ortho and cranial, very much like, okay, so can we bring presence and curiosity to what the body's trying to do and support it in its own healing process to release things? And it can be a very, very deep process, and it can be hands-on, and you can also do them both at a distance. And then emotional freedom technique has roots in traditional East Asian medicine. It's working with the meridian system, and basically like you're just tapping on the ends of different meridians, and you can work with like phrases or emotions. And I find it really potent because it's something that people can share, with their friends and family. Like it's one of those things that like you can teach somebody for 10 minutes or an hour, and then they have this tool for self-healing. And EFT for me was one of the things that really helped me like not be afraid of myself so much. It was like I noticed like, oh, I'm having anxiety or avoidance, and like it sort of helped me turn towards those things and realize like, oh, okay, what good information is there here, and like what can I take care of that can release and make me feel better? And I have this tool to support this exploration. um, and then I have some training in the neuroaffective relational model, which I think is very valuable. It's for excuse me, unwinding developmental trauma. And I think there's ways that we can use it in relation to structural trauma too. And it's really, it sort of fits in with all the other things that I do, in terms of like the focus is really like, how do you befriend yourself? How do you tap into your own wisdom? How do you sort of come into alignment with your own energies and power? to be more present in the world. And like the more present we are, the more kind we are. So
Okay, all right, ma'am. Thank you so much for your amazing answer. Your answer is very, very amazing. Thank you so much for your answers. So, my next question is what are some common misconceptions and myths uh, about intuitive healing, and how do you address them in your practice?
yeah, I think there's a couple. I think, one is that like somebody else has the power, and they're going to heal us or fix us. And really, like, in my practice, it's more like I'm holding a space and like, asking questions and witnessing the person. And, it's their own exploration. And, healing is very much a process of like reconnecting with ourselves and like our interconnections with the whole web of life. Um, I think another misconception is that like trauma healing is traumatic, and I think a lot of times, it's like the patterns that we have from trauma that are causing us pain. And a lot of time, it's not about like a grueling process or like digging back into painful memories, although those things can come up certainly. But it's much more about like, is there a perceptual shift that can kind of like reorganize sort of how you're experiencing everything. And it's so much fun, and I don't know, I say sometimes, I do this work because like I'm just so curious about people, and this is a socially acceptable way of being curious about people. But yeah, I think I'd say like if anybody is hesitant, like, there's nothing inside of you that's bad. There's nothing inside of you that's too scary or too big to deal with. And like the more we can tune into that, like the more liberation we experience.
Yes, you're right. Thank you so much for your answer. So, how can someone who is new to intuitive healing or energy work get started? Are there any beginner friendly practices or resources you recommend?
Yeah, so some beginner friendly practices, like I think really starting with like how do you like what do you know and how do you know it? And like it can be really small. Like a lot of times I'll have people come into my practice and like they don't really know how to answer like what are they noticing or what are they feeling, but like asking smaller and smaller questions like, do you like chocolate or do you like vanilla? Or maybe you like lemon, or maybe you're not hungry, sort of like asking those kind of questions. And then it's like, oh, how do you know? Like, are there particular sensations you have when you think about chocolate? Are there particular, you know, ways you notice energy moving in your body? And, like, how do you know when you don't like something? Do you like to cross your legs or uncross your legs? Instead of like starting with these very low stakes questions, it's like it's that same set of tools that we bring into you know energetic tracking, or I think it's also sort of how we befriend our bodies. Like, oh, like I like crossing my legs. Well, why? Like, what happens in my body? Like, what's my body telling me about like a position that's uncomfortable? And I think a lot of people are afraid of like noticing discomfort, but like a lot of times, like I have a client who they were tuning into their body and then they realized their back was hurting. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, what if you get a pillow and so you can tilt your pelvis so your back is more comfortable? And it's like having the awareness that's big enough to include the discomfort gave them the sort of like power and leverage to notice like, oh, I can shift something about what I'm doing and then be more comfortable. So sort of like just gradually like expanding our awareness in those ways. And then getting curious about like, oh, like there's this tree I really like I wonder if the tree has anything to share with me, or how do I feel when I'm in relationship with the tree? Do I like to stand 6 feet away, or do I like to hug the tree? Or it's sort of like playing just with these very sort of small things prepares us for the sort of more uh, bigger creative field that we enter into with spirit work and energy work. Oh, I'll share another one. This is a fun partner exercise. Like you touch somebody, like you might touch their hand or their arm or something, and you just tune into the layers of their body. Tune into their energy field, their skin, the tissue, the muscle, the bone, the blood vessels. And it's an amazing amount of information that comes from that, and like an amazing amount of like personality and messages. Like, I think everything in the universe wants to communicate with us, and just like, particularly if we're doing it with somebody we trust, it's like there's just a little space of like, just making a little space gives us a wealth of information, and like that can be very exciting, and it can kind of give us the incentive to like keep exploring.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much for your answers. So my next question is, can you share a success story or particular impactful experience where intuitive healing made a significant difference in someone's life or well-being?
Oh gosh, I'm never good at picking one thing. I think I've had a lot of people who have had, like, they've lost someone close to them, and it just feels like an enormous loss. And sort of a lot of times, like, oftentimes a loss is the doorway to like exploring a bigger sense of connection. And sometimes like like as in the process, like they sort of come into a different kind of a sense of connection with the person, and like also a much greater facility with their own spiritual just their whole spiritual life, and sort of the possibilities of like the beings they can be in conversation with. And it might be like being in conversation with like beings in their tradition, or with God, or maybe with animals, or like it can, it could be with ancestors or loved ones. It's sort of a whole big field of how people have relationships with the bigger picture. I've also had clients just like move past like, allergies or autoimmune conditions, or like, I had this session with a client one time. We just like did some postural work, and she came in the next time and she told me for 20 minutes about like what she got out of the session was she could sit and drink her tea in the mornings and like enjoy the tea and not rush. And like that was nothing to do with what we worked on, or like just sort of like everything's interconnected in our bodies and beings. So like you can sort of just start with one thing, and like everything in our system benefits, and everything in our like relational sphere benefits.
Right. All right. Thank you so much for your answer. So, in your classes and sessions, what do you find be the most challenging aspect, or individuals who are learning to embrace intuitive healing and self care practices?
I think so one thing that comes up a lot is like and this might be more of like a problem in the West, but like everybody's wanting to know, but like, oh, what do I do about it? How do I do it? And like, to me, like that's kind of the least interesting question. Like I think the deeper we go into the layers of presence, like the less there is to do. Like, and the more like we're present with the interconnections that already exist, and then like whatever the sort of more surface layer obstacles or like things we have to effort about. Like efforting in some ways is like a trauma response. It's like I'm trying to push this thing away or push through it. And like I think like the more people have experience with presence, like the more they realize that like the connection they're seeking is already there. But I think it's something that can be very scary, and I think that like a lot of times, like it's a trauma response born out of conscientiousness. Like, oh, if I'm just trying really hard, then I know I'm doing my best. Or like if I'm trying really hard, maybe that will protect me from something, or maybe it will protect me from my feelings. And like just sort of coming to this place of like, you know, we're already full of so much sacredness and so much beauty, and like being able to like just relax into ourselves and like surrender to, not only our center but to like everything that's holding us. I think it's a very different way of experiencing life that like I think you just kind of get from like a series of experiences of it. But I also think that like we have such a strong impulse towards healing. Like I think everything in the universe just has this like innate like orientation towards, like if we experience healing, we go towards that, and just sort of like understanding that we have the power to create more and more conditions for like creating that for ourselves and other people, I think is it's a short trip to our center, but I think like, there's just a lot of messages we get that like counteract, you know, how like what we need is really right there for us.
All right. So, can you share some example of how practical magic and distance healing have positively impacted in the lives of your clients and students?
Yeah, it's a question that I always feel like there's sort of, like whatever work we're doing is like one element and all the things we're doing. So I can't necessarily say like, oh, we did this thing and they had this result, because like a lot of times there's like a much bigger ecosystem of like their learning and being in the world. But, I've had a lot of clients just stop hating themselves, and I think that's really magical, especially people who have internalized depression. Um, and I think like I've had clients like never have an experience of like enjoying being in their body, and then like suddenly, oh, you've got you have tech support too. um, just, and I think like, sort of realizing like, oh, I could actually feel good, or like this way that like I think I'm limited in my life, like I could have it complete, like, whether it's something concrete, like I've never been able to write and now I can't stop writing, or, you know, like I wasn't able to exercise because it was too painful and now I enjoy going hiking, or just like, yeah, like now I know how to like listen to my cat. There's all kinds of, I think your next question is about animal communication. So,
All right. Thank you so much ma'am, for sharing this. So, what advice do you have for individuals who are interested in exploring intuitive healing as a career or as a way to enhance their own well-being and spiritually?
I think like the more places, like the more contexts you can put yourself in where the spirit world is something real that we can interact with, the better. I think and sort of like the more places you can put yourself in where your own curiosity is supported, and also just like any way that you can whatever degree that you're willing to explore what's inside of you is going to help the work, because I think so much of what spirit work is about witness. It's about what we can perceive and like our willingness to be perceived, by the beings. And I think if we feel like, oh, there's something in me that's bad, or there's some way that I'm going to be judged, or I'm not good enough, or, like anything that we might be afraid of feeling, it's like we're going to avoid those bigger connections because they're going to bring us to, they're going to be present with whatever we're trying to avoid. So it's like, I think the degree to which we can be less avoidant about our lives, and there's a lot of things, and I think it goes for internal things, and I think it goes for external things, like climate disruption. It's like it can feel very, very scary, and it can be easy to just shut down. And I think like the more we sort of can reckon with, like, we don't have control over outcomes, but like there's so much good work in the world right now, that like there's ways that we can show up. And I think that like I've done a lot of end of life work, and I think there's something very similar at the end of life as with like, ecological crises of like, there's certain losses and certain changes that we're going through that are bigger than we are, but like how we show up can be very fertile and very spiritually significant. And, I think it really makes a difference for the whole field. Like if somebody has presence when they're dying, like their whole family benefits from that, and I think like, yeah, there's just a lot of ways, like when we're in a relation to, war, conflict, big issues like this, it's like, I think the more we can really root in unconditional love, like the more capacity we have to just sort of objectively look at systems of harm and, imagine different ways of relating. And it's the same thing of like gravitating towards health. It's like if one person in the room is really like centered and loving and kind, then it's like that kind of gives permission for everybody else to like explore that. So I'm not remembering exactly the question, but
All right. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your incredible insights, experiences, and wisdom with us today. It has been a truly enlightening and inspiring conversation. To our audience, thank you for joining us today as this exploration or intuitive healing and holistic well-being. We hope you found this interview as enriching as we did. So once again, ma'am, thank you for being here. Wish you continued success in your journey to revive a better world through intuitive healing. And to our audience, stay tuned for more enlightening conversation in the future. Thank you so much, ma'am, once again.
thank you so much. It was really nice to meet you.
Me too. Thank you. Bye. Have a
Bye-bye.
wonderful